Everything is fine. And then there's this 2-page epilogue, which absolutely destroyed me. Hi, I'm Lucky's Universe, and in this week's video, I want to talk about one of the only books I might ever consider rating 6 stars, and that is Season of Fear by Emily Cooper. I did zero research on this book before I read it. I saw it at the library. The blurb read dark feminist fairy tale and seductive lesbian romance, so that was about the time that I knew that this book was coming home with me. Season of Fear is a young adult horror fantasy inspired by Bavarian folklore. Set in an isolated village situated beside a dangerous enchanted forest guarded by an evil saint. I mean, say less. I experienced the full range of emotions with this book and cried like a baby when it was over. So if I have to suffer from a book hangover, so do you. So sit back, grab your tea, grab your coffee, grab an alternate beverage of your choice, and let me tell you all about this book. I'm drinking water today because it's summer in Australia right now and it's 36 degrees today. And even for me, that is too hot for tea. By the way, this will be a spoiler-free review, so without further ado, let's get into it. Let's set the scene. Season of Fear begins in the isolated village of Hulency, which has long since been plagued by bloodthirsty supernatural creatures from the Hexenwald, which is the forbidden enchanted forest on the outskirts of the village. When the sky turns red, these creatures emerge from the Hexenwald and terrorize the people. Long ago, when the creatures first came, the saints that the villagers worshipped attempted to stop the creatures, but they were all slaughtered. Only one saint remained, the Saint of Fear, a giant patchwork creature made up of different animals that feeds on the feeling of fear. To protect the people, the villagers made a deal with the saint. As long as he protected them from the creatures that come from the Hexenwald, they would regularly feed him their fear, which would keep him strong. To do this, the villagers would have to teach themselves to live in constant fear and then offer it up to the saint, kind of like a sacrifice. However, the men of Hulency thought that this was a little bit much. It was a bit much for everyone in the village to live in constant fear because they would just never get anything done. So it was decided that only the women needed to be fearful. Every few years when the Hexenwald breaches, the women go outside and they kneel on the ground and they scream and they wail their fear, which makes the Saint of Fear strong. And he in turn fights off the monsters while the men hide inside. So we begin this story with our main character, Isla Odenwald, as a child. Her mother and her sister Thea are kneeling, bellowing under a red sky, feeding their fear to the saint, as 3 ghostly creatures known as Hexen, which are like the spirits that are in charge of the Hexenwald, they attack the village. But something is wrong. Unbeknownst to the other women, Isla was born without the ability to feel fear. Every other emotion, sure, but fear, it's just something she's simply not capable of. The only people who know about this are her mother and her sister, and now in this chapter, it's also clear that the saint has sensed it. He kills one of the Hexen, who is a young girl around Isla's age, but it's not enough. He's not strong enough to defeat the other 2, so he calls on the women for more fear. They do as he commands. They summon their fear from their deepest recesses, but the saint is zeroing in on Isla. She tries to fake it, but it's too late. He knows. In an attempt to generate more fear, he decapitates another Hulency girl. Still, Isla is unable to feel any fear. Horror, disgust, she's got that, but fear, no. And eventually the saint does get strong enough to defeat the other 2 Hexen, but Isla has a feeling he's not going to let this go. Fast forward to the present day. Isla is about to turn 18, and she's not as excited about this as you might think. In Hulency, when a girl turns 18, she has to go through something called the rite, where she enters the saint's den and offers up her fear in sacrifice. If you fail the rite and the saint rejects you, you will be banished from the village forever. Still unable to feel fear, Isla knows it's only a matter of time before she's banished and she never sees her family again. Isla knows that there's something wrong with her, but she also feels like there is something wrong with the rite. When her older sister Thea completed her rite, she returned changed. Although her sister completely denies this. Sometimes to Isla, Thea seems completely normal, but then at other times it's almost like she's a different person. But the other women of the village never speak about what happens in the rite, and Thea's not giving Isla a straight answer. Every so often Thea sleepwalks to the saint's den, but she has no memory of this. Both Isla and Thea's husband Hans are very concerned about this behavior, but nobody else in the village seems to think it's weird. And then the time comes for Isla's rite. So far she's managed to fake fear enough to convince the other villagers, but as soon as she enters the saint's den, he knows she's not fearful. In anger, he goes into the village and kills her grandmother. He literally skewers her on top of a tree while she's still alive. It's pretty gruesome. Then he presents Isla with an ultimatum. She has 30 days to find her Thea, or her sister Thea is going to be next. By now, the other villagers have figured out that Isla has failed her right, and they're trying to drive her out of the village. She decides to run away into the Hexenwald, which is the forest that everybody in the village knows you need to stay away from. Nobody who ever goes into the forest comes back the same, if they come back at all. If there was ever a place where Isla could find her Thea, it has got to be in there. Not long after she's entered the forest, Isla realizes that she's been followed by Thea's husband, Hans. Isla doesn't really like Hans, but he's insisting on going with her, both to protect Isla and also to help save Thea. The thing is with Isla is, while not fearing anything might be seen as a plus, it also means that Isla has no danger response. This is demonstrated when she first enters the Hexenwald and she comes across 3 men hanging from trees, half dead, like calling out to be saved. Not feeling any fear, she just goes up and tries to cut them down, not realizing that these are actually malicious spirits of the forest who are trying to like steal her soul. Hans, whose mother was once banished from the village because she was too interested in learning about the Hexenwald, he actually knows what these creatures are and is able to save Isla from them. So because of this, Isla decides that it might not be that bad to have Hans around, because if anything, he'll keep her out of danger. Before Isla left, her mother actually gave her a map of the Hexenwald and instructed her to find the cuckoo, which Isla thinks is the center of the forest, and there must be something in the center of the forest that will help her locate her fear. Isla has no idea how her mother came to be in possession of this map, but at the time it's her best chance. Hans and Isla's only problem is that they cannot navigate the Hexenwald. The magic of the forest has stuck them in some sort of loop, so even though they travel for hours, they end up in the same place that they started. The Hexenwald is also made to terrify you. Aside from it being full of creatures that want to kill you, while they're traveling, Hans and Isla discover a rotation of seasons that the forest seems to go through. The rot season is where everything in the forest seems to decay. These rotting corpses turn up, there's a bunch of like gross insects. Then the fall season, where everything looks actually like quite cute. Like all the animals are very cute and everything's sparkly and it almost looks like your typical enchanted magic fairy forest. They call it the fall season because both Isla and Hans know that this is a facade. Then comes the fear season, where the trees start to bleed, the birds start screaming, and you're filled with a sense of fear and terror, which obviously Isla can't feel, but like Hans he's going through it. And then there's the ether season, which is the last season. Ether is a thick, dark magic mist. I think it's the only way I can really describe it. Like the ponds are full of it. It's in the air. It has this really cloying, sweet scent to it. And then it has almost like a stupefying or drunk effect on you. So all of a sudden, Isla accidentally disturbs an ash tree, which turns out to be a spirit, which then picks Isla up and tries to crush her. In an attempt to fight it off, Isla just shoves a handful of juniper at this tree, which in the village, it's believed that juniper can ward off evil spirits and monsters. To her surprise, the tree then turns into a beautiful girl. Turns out the girl is a hexen, a magical spirit of the forest who was trapped inside the tree by a curse, and only by being offered something could she be set free. Isla asks her name, but the girl doesn't reply, so Isla decides to call her Ash, and this enrages the girl because apparently when you name a creature of the Hexenwald, that creature is then bound almost to carry out a wish for you, or they have to help you. This kind of works out for Isla, and she enlists Ash's help to help her stop the Saint of Fear from killing her sister. She assumes that since Ash is a hexen, that she'll be able to navigate the forest. And it's also not that objectionable that Isla finds Ash very attractive. And that's where I'm going to end the recap, because once you get to the halfway point of this book, we start entering spoiler territory. The rest of the book is full of secrets, heartbreak, horror, the perfect ratio of romance. It's so good. Words cannot describe just how good this book is. Young adult horror fantasy is a really interesting genre that I very much enjoy. However, it can also be a little bit hit and miss, because on the one hand, horror requires elements of gore and violence and fear, but then on the other hand, you're writing for teenagers, so these authors walk this fine line between needing something to be scary to match the genre, but not so scary that it like traumatizes a generation of readers. Season of Fear is like right on that edge. I was about 50 pages in before I started to question whether or not this was actually YA, because the goriness of the content is like, it's quite descriptive. It's probably the most graphic young adult book that I have read in a long time, and I would consider myself quite desensitized to this kind of stuff. Some would argue that if the protagonist is 18, then it should be an adult fantasy, but I am personally of the opinion that a book is young adult until the protagonist turns 20. I guess if you want to be technical, you could call this new adult, although new adult is not really an officially recognized genre. So for now, like, I think we're just gonna stick with young adult. Young adult horror is dark, it's gruesome, and it also tends to carry a bit of mystery as well. Like Season of Fear weaving in Bavarian folklore, it's often riddled with fairy tales and fables and magic. Other YA fantasy horrors I've read that I've quite enjoyed have been House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland and also Not Good for Maidens by Tori Bovalino, I believe. They both rely on myth and legend to shape their stories and incorporate a great balance of like mystery and horror. I also want to touch on the dark feminist fairy tale that the blurb has promised. The idea of a village that has convinced women to live in fear because it comes more naturally to them is actually very intriguing to me because they have been conditioned. At the time that this story takes place, it's been about 100 years since the Saint of Fear first entered the village, and it's gotten to the point where no one even questions why women have to be the ones to be fearful. There's also the fact that nobody talks about the right, like women's fear has become this shameful, hidden thing, even though it's the very thing that keeps Hewlency safe. It's like how men think that menstruation is gross, even though it's literally the thing that made their existence possible. Speaking of men being men, the men of Hewlency put far more emphasis on the Saint of Fear being the savior of the village rather than the women, and refused to acknowledge that without fear, the Saint of Fear would be nothing. He wouldn't be strong enough to defeat the creatures of the Hexenwald. In turn, the women still view the men as braver and stronger, even though they're the ones that hide inside when the creatures come, while the women have to go outside and like fight the creatures with the Saint of Fear. And also, let's talk about how fear has become this religion in Hewlency. There is a priest, who is a man, of course, who interprets the will of the saint. It's so telling that men made it so that women have to live in fear, and then they are also in charge of preaching to these women the importance of feeling fear. And women have to attend almost like this kind of church thing, and even before they take their rite, their fear has to be approved by the priest before they can go to the saint's den. And then everyone in the village, even like women, men, they all gather around to like watch this girl show off her fear. It's very weird. And also the women would like try and outperform each other to see like who was the most fearful, who had the best display of fear. It gives light to the idea of performative fear and how sometimes in reality we women feel like we have to put on a show of being weaker or more afraid or less capable in order to make men feel better about themselves. It's always great when there's, you know, real world parallels in a young adult novel because it shows that you're learning something by reading it. And to comment on Isla for a little bit, throughout the book, Isla has a very low opinion of herself. She's undertaken this journey at first almost to fix herself. She views herself as broken, as wrong, and feels like it's her fault that fear is in danger. Her big goal is to just find her fear and finally be accepted by the village and feel like one of the villagers. Which is a great premise because usually in YA novels, it's the protagonist trying to get over their fear, not create it. This comes up again when Isla starts to develop feelings for Ash because although it's not strictly stated in the book, it's kind of implied that homosexuality is not a thing that happens in this village. So Isla's just like, well, great, it's just another thing that's wrong with me. And then the narrative takes this turn and it becomes less about trying to fix yourself and more about accepting who you are. It was a great, natural, gradual shift. It was very well done. And there is so much more that I could say about this book, but I don't want to spoil it, so let's wrap this up. My final thoughts, like I said, this is probably a 6-star read. I loved the incorporation of Bavarian folklore. It's riddled with themes of earth and nature and forest spirits and unique mythical creatures. The romance was also a nice touch. I was worried a bit at the beginning because of the maturity of the novel. I thought the romance was going to be a bit spicy, but I was pleasantly surprised that it's entirely closed door. I really shouldn't be surprised that we're not putting spice in YA. It's as it should be. I also found out that this is Emily Cooper's debut novel. This is wild for a debut, and I need like 5 more of these now. Like I said at the top of the video, I cried like an absolute child when I finished this book. I finished it the morning before I had to go to work and was absolutely disgusted that I had to go to my job instead of lying in bed and sobbing for the day. And when I say I cried, I don't mean that this book is sad. It's more bittersweet. Everything is fine. And then there's this 2-page epilogue which absolutely destroyed me. If you like your YA books with creepy vibes and a dash of lesbian romance, this is your book. I'm shocked I haven't seen this more on the internet. I think this came out in August this year, and I feel like Book Talk would eat this up, but maybe I'm not running in the right circles. But anyway, if you take away anything from this video at all, it's just that I really, really love this book and you should so definitely read it. And that is my full spoiler-free recap and review of Season of Fear by Emily Cooper. Make sure to like and comment on this video. My YouTube views are obviously in the toilet after ghosting the internet for 2 years. For more bookish content, go and follow my Instagram. You can also find me on Storygraph to keep up with what I'm reading. Everything is linked down below. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later.